My daughter locked me out on Christmas morning like I was nothing more than a stranger begging at her door. The cold December air in Queens bit through my worn coat as I stood there, clutching homemade cookies that would never be tasted. My own flesh and blood had decided I wasn't worth the warmth of family on the most sacred day of the year. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I am 72 years old, and I thought I had seen every kind of pain this world could offer. I was wrong. The deepest cuts come from those we love most, delivered with surgical precision by hands we once held as they took their first steps. My name is Margaret, and this is the story of how I lost everything I thought mattered, only to discover what truly does. That Christmas morning started like so many others in recent years. I woke before dawn in my cramped studio apartment on Astoria Boulevard, where the radiator clanged like an angry ghost and the neighbor's television bled through paper-thin walls. The smell of old coffee grounds and that peculiar mustiness that seems to cling to places where hope goes to die filled my nostrils as I shuffled to the kitchenette. My hands, spotted with age and twisted slightly from arthritis, carefully packed a shoebox with treasures I'd been preparing for weeks. Sugar cookies cut into perfect stars, each one decorated with the kind of patience only grandmothers possess. An emerald green scarf I'd knitted during sleepless nights, counting stitches instead of counting grievances. And buried beneath it all, a photo album bound in cracked leather, filled with memories of birthdays and first days of school, Christmas mornings when my daughter Sarah still believed in magic. I dressed in my best wool dress, the navy one with tiny pearl buttons that I'd worn to church every Sunday for the past 15 years. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman trying too hard to look worthy of love. Foundation couldn't quite cover the exhaustion etched around my eyes, and lipstick couldn't brighten the sadness that had settled into the corners of my mouth. The subway ride to Sarah's apartment in Astoria took 37 minutes. I know because I counted every one, watching my breath fog the window while I rehearsed what I'd say when she opened the door. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I brought your favorites." Simple words that carried the weight of a lifetime's worth of giving. But when I climbed those 3 flights of stairs, my knees protesting each step, and knocked on apartment 4B, the voice that answered wasn't filled with holiday joy. It was cold, distant, filtered through wooden locks and years of accumulated resentment. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "It's Christmas morning, honey. I brought cookies and we talked about this. We're having a quiet Christmas. Just us." I pressed my palm against the door, feeling the vibrations of life happening on the other side. Children's laughter. The scratch of wrapping paper. The warm sounds of family that I was somehow not part of. "Sarah, please. Just for an hour. I won't stay long." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Then, in a voice that might as well have been reading a grocery list, "Mom, you need to go home. We'll call you later." No later call came. No text message. No acknowledgement that their mother had stood in a hallway for 43 minutes, holding cookies that grew cold in her trembling hands. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly? Have you ever wondered if your love has become a burden instead of a gift? Because standing in that hallway, I felt like I was disappearing one piece at a time. The train ride home blurred past windows streaked with my tears. I set the untouched cookies on my kitchen counter and stared at them for hours, wondering where I had gone so wrong that my presence had become unwelcome in my own daughter's life. But this story doesn't start with that locked door. It starts 37 years earlier, when I held Sarah for the first time and promised her I would never let anything hurt her. It starts with a young mother who thought love meant saying yes to everything, giving until there was nothing left to give. I was 28 when Sarah was born, already divorced from a man who decided fatherhood wasn't part of his 5-year plan. Her first cry in that hospital room at Mount Sinai was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, and her tiny fingers wrapped around mine with a grip that said, "We're in this together, Mom." For the next 18 years, it was Sarah and me against the world. I worked double shifts as a nurse at New York Presbyterian, coming home exhausted to help with homework, pack school lunches, and tuck her into bed with stories about princesses who saved themselves. When other mothers complained about their husbands, I silently celebrated our independence. When other families went on vacations, we turned our living room into camping adventures with blankets and flashlights. Money was always tight, stretched thin between rent, groceries, and the 1,000 small expenses that come with raising a child in one of the world's most expensive cities. But somehow, we made it work. I bought generic cereal so Sarah could have name-brand sneakers. I wore the same winter coat for 8 years so she could take piano lessons. I canceled my subscription to the newspaper but made sure we had cable so she could watch the shows her friends talked about at school. When Sarah turned 16 and wanted to learn to drive, I sold my grandmother's wedding ring to pay for driving lessons. When she needed a prom dress, I picked up extra shifts for 2 months, arriving home so tired I could barely stand, but watching her face light up when we found the perfect dress made every aching step worth it. "You're the best mom in the world," she used to tell me, usually when I was doing something that cost me more than I could afford. And I believed I was doing what mothers do. I believed love meant sacrifice, even when the sacrifice left me hollow. College applications came with their own financial challenges. Sarah's grades were good, but not quite good enough for full scholarships. I took out Parent Plus loans that would follow me into my 70s, juggling payment plans like a street performer juggling fire. When she got accepted to NYU, I cried in the financial aid office, not from joy but from the crushing weight of knowing I'd somehow have to make the numbers work. "Don't worry, Mom," Sarah said, hugging me as we walked across Washington Square Park after her orientation. "I'll make you proud. I'll pay you back someday." Someday became a word I clung to like a life preserver. Someday she'd graduate and get a good job. Someday she'd understand the sacrifices I'd made. Someday she'd take care of me the way I'd taken care of her. But someday has a way of shifting like sand beneath your feet. Sarah met Marcus during her sophomore year. He was studying business, or trying to study business when he wasn't busy organizing parties and developing what he called entrepreneurial ventures. I wanted to like him. I tried to like him. But there was something about the way his eyes calculated the value of everything in our small apartment when he first visited that made my skin crawl. "Marcus has such great ideas, Mom," Sarah would gush during our weekly phone calls. "He's going to start his own company. We're going to travel the world." The dreams got bigger while the grades got smaller. Sarah's focus shifted from her studies to Marcus's schemes. Late-night phone calls became arguments about responsibility that ended with her hanging up on me. When I tried to express concern about her changing priorities, she accused me of being jealous of her happiness. The first time she asked me for money beyond tuition and living expenses, I hesitated for exactly 3 seconds before saying yes. It was only $200 for what she called an investment opportunity. The second request came a month later. Then another. Each time, the amounts grew larger and the explanations grew vaguer. "It's just temporary, Mom. Marcus's business is about to take off, and then we'll pay you back everything." I watched my savings account drain like water through cupped hands. The retirement fund I'd been building since I was 30 began to shrink. The small nest egg I'd imagined would give me dignity in my old age disappeared into the black hole of their opportunities. When Sarah dropped out of college during her junior year to focus on the business full-time, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, I'd been broken before and survived. This was different. This was the sound of hope deflating, of realizing that all my sacrifices might have been for nothing. "Education isn't everything, Mom," Sarah explained over dinner at a diner near campus, picking at a salad while I pushed scrambled eggs around my plate. "Some of the most successful people never finished college. Some of the most successful people also had safety nets," I wanted to say. "They had families with money and connections and second chances." But I didn't say it. Instead, I bit my tongue and wrote another check. They moved in together 6 months later, into a studio apartment in Long Island City that cost more per month than I'd ever paid for housing. When I visited for the first time, I noticed the expensive sneakers by the door, the latest model iPhone charging on the counter, the gaming system that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "This place is nice," I said, though the word felt like sawdust in my mouth. "Thanks," Marcus replied without looking up from his laptop. "We're thinking about upgrading to a 1-bedroom soon." I wanted to ask how they planned to afford an upgrade when they couldn't afford their current rent without my help. But I'd learned that questions about finances were unwelcome interruptions to their perpetual optimism. The requests for money became as regular as my monthly bills. Rent help. Grocery money. Car repairs for a car I'd helped them buy. Emergency veterinary bills for a cat they'd adopted on impulse. Each crisis was presented as the last time they'd need help, the final bridge before their ship came in. I started picking up extra shifts at the hospital, even though my body screamed in protest. My knees ached from hours of standing. My back throbbed from lifting patients. My heart literally hurt from the stress of constant financial pressure. But I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they just needed time to get established. The first birthday they forgot was my 68th. I sat in my kitchen that evening, looking at a store-bought cupcake with a single candle, wondering if I'd imagined the day was important. When I called Sarah the next morning to subtly mention it, she sounded genuinely surprised. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Things have been crazy with work. We'll make it up to you." They never made it up to me. Instead, that became the pattern. Forgotten birthdays, missed holidays, cancelled plans. Unless they needed money, I heard from them less and less. Our relationship had been reduced to an ATM transaction. They pressed buttons, I dispensed cash. The breaking point should have been when I found the eviction notice. I was helping them move into their third apartment in 2 years, carrying boxes up 4 flights of stairs while they supervised from below. A piece of paper fell from one of Sarah's folders, and I bent to pick it up without thinking. It was an eviction notice from their previous landlord, dated 3 months earlier. They'd been kicked out for non-payment of rent, the same rent I'd been sending money to help cover for over a year. My hands shook as I read the details: months of missed payments, ignored warnings, legal proceedings. "Mom, that's private," Sarah said, snatching the paper from my hands when she noticed what I was reading. "You told me the money was for rent," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was for rent," Marcus interrupted. "Eventually. We just had some cash flow issues." Cash flow issues became their explanation for everything. Why they needed my grocery money to pay for concert tickets. Why they borrowed my emergency fund for a weekend trip to Atlantic City. Why I was eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner while they posted photos of expensive restaurant meals on social media. I should have said no. I should have drawn boundaries. I should have demanded receipts and bank statements and proof that my money was being used for survival, not entertainment. But every time I considered it, I remembered Sarah as a little girl, crying because other kids had things she couldn't have. I remembered promising her that I would always take care of her. I remembered the fear that saying no might mean losing her completely. So I said yes. Again and again and again. Until the day I couldn't anymore. The day I noticed I was wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation because I couldn't afford new clothes. The day I had to choose between my blood pressure medication and their electric bill. The day I looked in my bathroom mirror and saw a woman who had given away so much of herself that nothing recognizable remained. Have you ever loved someone so much that you lost yourself completely? Have you ever wondered if your kindness was actually weakness, if your generosity was enabling destruction? Because that's where I found myself, depleted, exhausted, and angry at everyone, especially myself. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in November. I was getting ready for work, moving slowly because my arthritis was particularly bad, when my cell phone buzzed with Sarah's number. "Mom, I need to ask you a favor." Not, "How are you feeling?" or, "How was your doctor's appointment?" Just straight to the ask, like I was customer service for the Bank of Mom. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Our car payment is overdue, and if we don't get caught up by Friday, they're going to repossess it. Marcus needs the car for work, so we really can't let that happen." I closed my eyes and leaned against my kitchen counter, feeling the familiar weight of their emergency becoming my burden. "How much?" $1,800. $1,800. More than my monthly rent. More than my grocery budget for 3 months. More than I had in my checking account without dipping into the savings I'd promised myself I wouldn't touch. "Sarah, I don't have $1,800 just sitting around." "But you have that account, right? The one you're always saying is for emergencies?" "This is an emergency, Mom." "That account. My retirement fund. The money I'd been slowly rebuilding after years of depletion. The safety net that was supposed to keep me from becoming a burden to anyone when I got older. That money is for my retirement, honey. It's not for emergencies unless they're my emergencies." Silence stretched between us, filled with her disapproval and my guilt. "I can't believe you're saying that," she finally said, her voice sharp with accusation. "After everything Marcus and I have been through, after all the bad luck we've had, you're going to let them take our car because you want to hoard money you're probably never going to use anyway." Hoard money. Like I was some dragon sitting on a pile of gold instead of a 70-year-old woman trying to avoid eating cat food in her 80s. "Sarah, I've given you and Marcus over $30,000 in the past 2 years. I've helped with rent, groceries, medical bills, car repairs, and now car payments. Where does it end?" "It ends when we get back on our feet, Mom." "God, you're being so selfish. I never thought my own mother would abandon me when I needed help the most." The word abandon hit like a physical blow. I, who had never missed a school play or soccer game or parent-teacher conference, was being accused of abandonment for not emptying my retirement account. But something clicked in that moment. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the realization that I was drowning while trying to save someone who wasn't even swimming toward shore. Maybe it was the simple recognition that getting back on their feet required them to actually try standing up. "I'm not abandoning you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I'm not giving you $1,800 either." She hung up on me. For 3 days, my phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no updates about whether they'd managed to save the car. I went to work, came home, made simple dinners, and tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. But doubt crept in during quiet moments. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should have helped one more time. Maybe this was the crisis that would finally motivate them to change. When Sarah finally called, her voice was different. Colder. More distant. "We managed to work something out with the car," she said without preamble. "Marcus's brother lent us the money. I'm glad you found a solution." "No thanks to you." I wanted to point out that Marcus's brother somehow had $1,800 to spare while I was being called selfish for not emptying my retirement account. I wanted to ask why they hadn't called his brother first, or second, or at any point before me. But I knew the answer. Because I was the reliable source. I was the one who always said yes. "Sarah, I love you. But I can't save it, Mom. I know where I stand now. I know I can't count on you when it really matters." She hung up again. The weeks that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. No daily texts asking for advice or money. No calls to complain about work or Marcus or the general unfairness of adult life. No invitations to dinners I couldn't afford at restaurants I wouldn't enjoy. Just silence. I told myself this was what I wanted. Space. Boundaries. The chance to focus on my own life instead of constantly managing theirs. But the silence felt like punishment, like proof that my value as a mother had always been measured in dollars rather than love. Thanksgiving passed without acknowledgement. Not even a text message. I spent the day volunteering at a soup kitchen in Manhattan, serving meals to people who thanked me for every small kindness while my own daughter couldn't be bothered to check if I was alive. 2 weeks before Christmas, I tried reaching out. A simple text, "Thinking of you both. Hope you're well." The response came 3 days later, "We're fine." I stared at those 2 words on my phone screen and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not sadness this time, but clarity. This was not how people who loved me would treat me. This was not how family behaved. But old habits die hard, and hope dies even harder. So when Christmas morning arrived, I packed that shoebox with cookies and scarves and memories, convinced that showing up with love in my hands would somehow bridge the gap that had opened between us. Standing in that hallway, listening to life happening on the other side of a locked door, I finally understood what I'd been refusing to see for months. I wasn't being locked out of Christmas. I was being locked out of their lives unless I was prepared to pay for admission. The walk back to the subway felt different than it had 2 hours earlier. My steps were slower, but somehow steadier. The cookies in my box were cold, but I wasn't shaking anymore. Something had crystallized in the moment when Sarah's voice dismissed me through that door. Something I couldn't quite name yet, but could feel settling into my bones like winter. When I got home to my small apartment, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat at my kitchen table and ate Christmas dinner by myself. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and decided that choosing myself was special enough. Then I opened that photo album I'd packed for Sarah and looked at 20 years of memories with new eyes. Birthday parties where I'd worked extra shifts to afford the cake and presents. School events where I'd been the only parent cheering in the audience. Graduations where I'd cried with pride while calculating how much the celebration dinner would cost. In every photo, I saw a woman giving everything she had to someone who had learned to expect it rather than appreciate it. I saw a mother who had confused love with sacrifice so completely that she'd forgotten they could exist separately. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept deeply. Not because I was happy, I was far from happy. But because I was finally tired of being tired. The next morning brought news that would have devastated me just days earlier, but somehow felt like confirmation of everything I'd begun to understand. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on my door with her morning tea and a piece of gossip she thought I should hear. "Margaret, did you know that car got repossessed yesterday? The young couple in 4B? I saw the tow truck from my window. The car. The $1,800 I'd refused to provide. The emergency that had driven a wedge between us had come to pass anyway, despite their solution. I should have felt guilty. I should have wondered if my refusal had contributed to their loss. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absence of responsibility for problems I hadn't created. That's unfortunate, I said, and meant it. But I also meant the part of me that didn't immediately reach for my checkbook to fix it. Mrs. Chen studied my face with the sharp eyes of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of human drama. "You look different," she said. Rested. Rested. What a strange word to describe someone whose family had just cut her off. But she was right. I did feel rested, the way you feel rested after finally putting down a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed quietly. I worked my regular shifts at the hospital, came home to my own space, and slowly began to remember what it felt like to live for myself. I bought groceries without calculating whether I could afford to help with someone else's rent. I paid my own bills without the knot of anxiety that came from wondering what crisis would empty my account next. On New Year's Eve, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to a party. It was nothing fancy, a small gathering at Mrs. Chen's apartment with a few other neighbors, mostly people over 60 who had their own stories of family complications and hard-won wisdom. We played cards, shared stories, and toasted the new year with cheap champagne that tasted better than any expensive dinner I'd ever funded. "Here's to learning the difference between love and enabling," said Mrs. Rodriguez, raising her plastic cup. She'd been divorced 3 times and raised 4 kids as a single mother in the Bronx. If anyone understood complicated family dynamics, it was her. We all drank to that, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt part of something that didn't cost me anything but my presence. January brought cold that seemed to seep into every corner of the city, but I found myself feeling warmer than I had in months. Without the constant drain of other people's financial emergencies, I had breathing room. I could afford a cup of coffee without calculating the cost. I could buy a book without guilt. I could save money without immediately wondering who would need it more than I did. The silence from Sarah and Marcus continued, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space to remember who I was before I became just a source of funds. Space to rediscover interests I'd forgotten I had. Space to build a life that didn't revolve around crisis management. I started attending a book club at the local library. Joined a walking group that met in Central Park every Wednesday morning. Signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. Small things, but they felt revolutionary after years of having no time or energy for anything beyond work and worry. The first time Marcus called, it was February, and they were facing eviction again. "Mrs. G, I know things have been weird between you and Sarah, but we really need help. The landlord is being unreasonable, and if we can't come up with 3 months' rent, we're going to be homeless." Mrs. G. Like I was some distant relative instead of the woman who'd raised his girlfriend and funded their lifestyle for years. "That sounds very stressful," I said, and meant it. He waited for me to offer help. When I didn't, he pushed harder. "Sarah's too proud to call, but this is serious. We might have to move in with my brother in New Jersey, and Sarah would lose her job." Moving in with his brother. The same brother who'd had $1,800 for car payments but apparently not 3 months' rent. "I hope you find a solution," I said. "That's it? That's all you're going to say? After everything Sarah's done for you?" Everything Sarah had done for me. I tried to remember what that might be, but came up empty. Unless he meant allowing me to give her money for the privilege of being occasionally acknowledged. "Marcus, I love Sarah, but I can't solve every crisis with money I don't have. You have that retirement account." "Yes, I do. And it's staying in that retirement account." He hung up on me, but this time I didn't spend days wondering if I'd made the right choice. I knew I had. March brought the first warm day of spring and a direct call from Sarah. Her voice was sharp with desperation masquerading as anger. "Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to us. Marcus's brother can only let us stay for another month, and we can't find anywhere affordable to live. Do you want us to be homeless?" The question was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me believe that their homelessness would be my fault rather than the result of years of poor financial decisions enabled by my misguided generosity. "I don't want anyone to be homeless," I said. "But Sarah, you're 35 years old. Marcus is 37. You've both been adults longer than you were children. At some point, your financial problems have to become your responsibility, not mine. I can't believe you're saying that. After I took care of you when Dad left. After I helped you through your depression. After everything we've been through together. Took care of me when her father left." I tried to remember 8-year-old Sarah taking care of anyone. Helped me through my depression. I remembered working extra shifts to pay for her piano lessons while dealing with divorce papers and single motherhood, but I couldn't recall any help from a child who was rightfully focused on childhood. Sometimes people rewrite history to cast themselves as heroes in stories where they were simply loved and cared for. Sometimes they confuse being the recipient of sacrifice with being the one who sacrificed. "Sarah, I took care of you. That was my job as your mother, and I did it gladly. But taking care of you then doesn't mean I owe you my retirement now." "Fine," she said, her voice ice cold. "Don't come crying to me when you're old and alone and need someone to take care of you." She hung up, leaving me with a threat that revealed more than she'd probably intended. In her mind, my care in old age was conditional on my financial support now. Love with strings attached. Assistance with price tags. I sat in my quiet apartment after that call, looking around at the space that had become a refuge instead of a prison. The radiator still clanged, and the neighbors were still too loud, but these walls held peace now instead of anxiety. For the first time in months, I called my sister Janet in California. We'd grown distant over the years, partly because I'd been too busy managing Sarah's crises to maintain other relationships, and partly because I'd been too embarrassed to admit how much of my life had become about funding someone else's. Margaret? Janet's voice was surprised but warm. It's so good to hear from you. How are things? For once, I could answer honestly. Things are getting better. We talked for 2 hours. About her grandchildren, about books we'd read, about places we wanted to travel. Normal conversation between sisters, without the underlying current of crisis and financial stress that had colored my life for so long. You sound different, Janet said near the end of our call. Relaxed. There was that word again. Relaxed. Rested. Like I was recovering from a long illness. I think I'm learning to live my own life again, I told her. It's about time, she said, and I heard decades of concern in those 4 words. April brought warm weather and a subtle shift in my neighborhood. The same streets looked brighter somehow, as if I was seeing them clearly for the first time in years. I started noticing small things, the way morning light hit the fire escape outside my window, the sound of children playing in the courtyard below, the elderly man who fed pigeons every afternoon in the small park on the corner. I also started noticing how much money I had when I wasn't funding other people's emergencies. Not a fortune, but enough to feel secure. Enough to buy fresh vegetables instead of relying on pasta and bread. Enough to replace my worn-out winter coat. Enough to start thinking about small pleasures instead of constant crises. The book club had become a highlight of my week. 8 women, all between 60 and 80, meeting in the library's community room to discuss everything from classic literature to modern mysteries. These were women who'd raised children, buried spouses, survived divorces, and emerged with wisdom earned through experience. Family is complicated, said Eleanor, a retired teacher whose son lived across the country and called twice a year. We spend so much time thinking we owe them everything because we love them. But love shouldn't cost your peace of mind. My daughter used to call every time she needed money, added Patricia, whose carefully applied lipstick couldn't quite hide the sadness in her eyes. Then one day I realized she never called when she didn't need money. That's not a relationship. That's a transaction. These women understood something I was just beginning to learn. The difference between being needed and being used. The difference between supporting someone and enabling them. The difference between love and financial obligation. May brought Mother's Day, and with it, a test I hadn't anticipated. No card. No call. No acknowledgement of the holiday at all. I spent the morning volunteering at a nursing home in Queens, helping serve brunch to residents whose own families had forgotten them on Mother's Day. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was mothering strangers while my own daughter pretended I didn't exist. But something had shifted. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I felt grateful for the residents who smiled when I brought them juice, who thanked me for listening to their stories, who treated me with the kindness my own family had forgotten how to show. Mrs. Patterson, 93 and sharp as a tack despite her failing eyesight, grabbed my hand as I was leaving. You have kind eyes, she said. Someone raised you right. Someone had raised me right. My mother, who died 10 years earlier, had taught me about generosity and kindness and putting family first. But she'd also taught me about self-respect, though I'd forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way. Thank you, I told Mrs. Patterson, meaning it more than she could know. That evening, I cooked dinner for one and didn't apologize for it. I opened a bottle of wine, put on music I enjoyed, and celebrated the mother I'd been rather than mourning the gratitude I'd never received. June brought unexpected news. Mrs. Chen, who seemed to know everything that happened in our building, mentioned that she'd seen Sarah and Marcus moving trucks. They're gone, she said, settling into my kitchen chair with her evening tea. Left yesterday. Looked like they were in a hurry. Gone. No forwarding address shared with me. No goodbye. No acknowledgement that their mother lived 6 blocks away and might want to know where they'd landed. I should have felt abandoned. Instead, I felt liberated. The geographic distance matched the emotional distance that had been growing for months. Now there would be no unexpected visits asking for money, no guilt trips about being in the neighborhood and too busy to stop by. Are you okay? Mrs. Chen asked, studying my face. I think I am, I said, and realized I meant it. July marked 6 months since I'd last given them money, and I decided to celebrate by doing something I'd dreamed about for years but never been able to afford. I booked a weekend trip to Cape Cod, something small but symbolic. 3 days in a bed and breakfast, walking on beaches, reading books, eating meals without calculating their cost against someone else's needs. The train ride through Connecticut and Massachusetts felt like traveling to another planet. I watched suburbs give way to small towns, then coastal villages where people seemed to move at a different pace. No one was rushing to solve someone else's crisis or funding someone else's dreams. My room at the inn was small but charming, with white curtains and a view of the harbor. For 3 days, I did exactly what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. I ate breakfast at 9 a.m. because I felt like it, not because someone needed me to wire money before the bank closed. I took naps in the afternoon sun without guilt. I bought postcards and souvenirs without calculating their cost. On the beach one morning, watching waves roll in with hypnotic regularity, I met a woman about my age walking her dog. We struck up a conversation about the weather, the beauty of the coastline, the peace of early morning walks. I'm here celebrating my independence, I told her, though I wasn't sure why I shared something so personal with a stranger. Good for you, she said, as if she understood exactly what I meant. It took me 75 years to learn that independence isn't selfish. It's survival. Her words stayed with me long after she and her dog disappeared down the beach. Independence isn't selfish. It's survival. August brought a phone call that tested everything I'd learned. Sarah's voice was smaller than I'd heard it in years, tired and defeated. Mom, Marcus left. He took what was left in our account and moved to Florida with some woman he met online. I don't have anyone else to call. The old me would have wired money immediately, no questions asked. Would have seen my daughter's pain and wanted to fix it, regardless of the cost to my own stability. The new me felt sadness for her pain, but also recognition of a pattern. Marcus had left when the money ran out and the easy life ended. He'd moved on to someone else who might fund his dreams and overlook his failures. I'm so sad. That must be very painful. I can't afford this place by myself. I don't know what I'm going to do. The implied request hung in the air like smoke. She needed money. Again. Always. What are your options? My options? Mom, I don't have options. I have nowhere to go, no savings, and a job that barely covers groceries. I thought maybe I could come home for a while. Just until I get back on my feet. Come home. To my studio apartment that barely had room for one person, let alone two. To the space I'd worked so hard to make peaceful. To the life I'd finally started living for myself. Sarah, there's no room here. You know that. I could sleep on the couch. I wouldn't be any trouble. She wouldn't be any trouble until she was. Until late-night phone calls and financial crises and emotional drama filled every corner of my carefully constructed peace. What about getting a roommate? Or finding somewhere less expensive? With what money, Mom? I can't afford a deposit anywhere, and I can't find a roommate without having a place first. I need help. There it was. The bottomless need that had defined our relationship for years. The expectation that my resources should solve her problems. The assumption that saying no made me a bad mother. Sarah, I can give you the number for some social services that help with emergency housing. And I can probably help you find information about roommate matching services. Information? Mom, I don't need information. I need money. I need help. Real help. Real help. In Sarah's world, real help was always financial, never the kind of support that required her to develop her own resources or problem-solving skills. I love you, I said, meaning it completely. But I can't be your solution every time there's a problem. So that's it? Your only daughter is about to be homeless, and you're going to let it happen. Let it happen. As if her homelessness would be my fault rather than the consequence of 35 years of choices. As if my refusal to enable created the problem rather than simply failing to solve it. You're not going to be homeless, I said with more confidence than I felt. You're going to figure it out the way adults do. You're going to make hard choices and sacrifices and find a way through this that doesn't depend on someone else's money. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was different. Colder, but also somehow cleaner. I see. Well, I guess I know where I stand. You stand as my daughter, whom I love very much, but not as someone whose problems I'm going to solve with money I can't afford to give. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my kitchen afterward, hands shaking slightly, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. The old fears crept back. What if she really did become homeless? What if something happened to her and I hadn't helped when I could have? What if she never spoke to me again? But underneath the fear was something else. Relief. The relief that comes from finally speaking truth instead of managing expectations. The relief that comes from choosing your own survival over someone else's convenience. September brought news through Mrs. Chen's neighborhood intelligence network. Sarah had found a roommate and moved to a smaller apartment in Queens Village. Still in New York, but further away. Still struggling, but managing. She looks thinner, Mrs. Chen reported after seeing her at the grocery store. But she was paying for her own groceries. Paying for her own groceries. Such a small thing, but it represented something significant. The beginning of self-sufficiency that should have started years ago. I felt proud of her, which surprised me. Not proud of myself for refusing to help, but genuinely proud that she'd found a way to solve her own problem. Maybe, underneath all the enablement and dependency, there was still the resourceful little girl who used to build elaborate blanket forts and convince neighborhood kids to put on plays in our living room. October brought the first anniversary of my financial independence. A full year since I'd last given them money, and I was still alive. Still housed and fed and reasonably content. The retirement account I'd protected by saying no was growing again. The peace I'd cultivated by setting boundaries was holding steady. I celebrated quietly, taking myself to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Little Italy. Nothing fancy, but something I chose because I wanted to, not because someone needed me to pay for it. At the next table, a young couple was arguing about money. She wanted to ask her parents for help with their credit card debt. He thought they should figure it out themselves. They have money, I heard her say. And they love me. Why shouldn't they help? I wanted to lean over and tell her that the people who love you shouldn't have to prove it by emptying their bank accounts. I wanted to explain that asking for help and demanding it are two different things. I wanted to share what I'd learned about the difference between love and financial obligation. But I didn't. Instead, I paid my own check and walked home through the October evening, grateful for the hard-won wisdom that comes from learning to value yourself as much as you value others. November brought Thanksgiving, and with it, the first holiday in decades where I didn't spend weeks worrying about how much the celebration would cost. I volunteered again at the soup kitchen, arriving early to help with prep work and staying late to help with cleanup. The people I served were grateful for every kindness, every smile, every moment of human connection. They thanked me for ladling cranberry sauce and cutting pie, simple acts that required nothing from me but presence and willingness. "You've been coming here for a while now," said James, one of the regular volunteers. "It shows. People can tell when someone genuinely wants to be here versus someone doing it out of obligation." I realized he was right. For the first time in years, I was somewhere because I wanted to be, not because I felt guilty or obligated or afraid of disappointing someone. After the meal service ended, a few volunteers stayed to share coffee and leftover pie. We talked about family, about holidays, about the complicated dynamics of love and obligation. "My son calls me every few months," said Maria, a woman about my age who'd been volunteering there for years. "Usually when he needs something. I still love him, but I don't confuse love with being a bank account anymore." "How did you learn that?" asked David, whose daughter had moved across the country without leaving a forwarding address. "Time," Maria said. "And realizing that helping someone means teaching them to help themselves, not doing everything for them forever." I thought about Sarah, hopefully learning to solve her own problems, hopefully discovering strength she didn't know she had. Maybe my refusal to help had been the most loving thing I'd done for her in years. December arrived with the familiar decorations and holiday music that had once filled me with dread. Christmas was coming, and for the first time in years, I wasn't calculating how much it would cost or dreading the financial requests that came wrapped in holiday sentiment. I bought presents for the neighbors who'd become friends. Small things chosen with care rather than expensive things chosen out of obligation. I decorated my apartment with lights and greenery from the dollar store, creating beauty that cost less than a single emergency loan to people who never said thank you. On December 20th, almost exactly 1 year after the locked door incident, my phone rang with Sarah's number. I stared at it for several rings, wondering if I was ready for whatever this conversation might bring. "Mom?" Her voice was different. Older, somehow. More tired, but also more stable. I wanted to call before Christmas. To tell you. She paused, searching for words. "I've been thinking about last year. About everything that happened." I waited, not sure where this was leading. I was angry for a long time. At you, at Marcus, at everyone. But mostly I was scared. I didn't know how to take care of myself without someone else's help. The admission hung between us like a bridge that might be crossed or burned. And now? Now I'm still scared sometimes. But I'm doing it. Taking care of myself. It's hard, but I don't know how to explain it. It feels different when you solve your own problems. It feels different when you solve your own problems. I felt tears starting, but they were different tears than I'd cried over our relationship before. These were tears of relief, of recognition, of something that might be the beginning of genuine respect. "I'm proud of you," I said, meaning it completely. "Are you? Really? Even though I was so awful to you?" "You weren't awful, sweetheart. You were struggling. We both were. I think I want to see you. If that's okay. Not for money or help or anything like that. Just to see you." My heart did something complicated in my chest. Hope mixed with caution, love mixed with hard-won wisdom. I'd like that too. We made plans to meet for coffee the day after Christmas. Neutral territory, no pressure, no expectations beyond seeing each other and talking honestly. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, and for the first time in years, I woke up eager rather than dreading the day. I had nowhere to be, no one to please, no obligations except to myself. I made coffee, read the newspaper, and later met Mrs. Chen for Christmas dinner at her apartment with our small group of neighborhood friends. We ate too much, laughed at old stories, and toasted the year we'd all survived. Eleanor had heard from her son for the first time in months. Patricia's daughter had sent a Christmas card without asking for money. Mrs. Rodriguez had decided to stop loaning money to her grandsons. "Here's to learning when to say no," she said, raising her glass. "And when to say yes to ourselves," added Eleanor. I drank to that and felt the truth of it settling into my bones. The next morning, I walked to the coffee shop where Sarah and I had agreed to meet. My hands weren't shaking this time. I wasn't carrying boxes of cookies or photo albums or desperate hope. I was carrying only myself, and that felt like enough. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. She looked different, thinner, as Mrs. Chen had reported, but also more present somehow. Less scattered. Her clothes were simpler, her hair shorter, her makeup minimal. "Hi Mom," she said, standing to hug me. The hug felt different too. Less desperate, more genuine. Like it came from choice rather than obligation or manipulation. We sat down across from each other, 2 women who happened to be mother and daughter but were also, in that moment, just 2 people trying to figure out how to love each other without destroying themselves. "You look good," Sarah said, studying my face. "Happy. I feel better than I have in years." "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, the words rushing out like she'd been holding them back. "For last Christmas. For the way I treated you. For so many things." "I'm sorry too," I said, meaning it. "For enabling you instead of believing in you. For teaching you that love meant always saying yes. For not setting boundaries sooner." We talked for 2 hours. About the past year, about what we'd both learned, about what we wanted our relationship to look like going forward. Sarah told me about her job, which was demanding but satisfying. About her roommate, who'd become a friend. About learning to cook and budget and solve problems without calling for rescue. "I understand now," she said as we were getting ready to leave. "When you stopped giving me money. I thought you were being cruel, but you were actually being kind. You were making me grow up." Growing up. Such a simple concept, but so hard to do when someone else is always there to catch you before you fall. "I love you," I told her as we hugged goodbye. "I've always loved you. But I had to learn the difference between loving you and losing myself." "I love you too, Mom. And I want to earn that love instead of just expecting it. Earning love instead of expecting it. Maybe there was hope for us after all." Walking home through the December afternoon, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. I felt proud of both of us. Proud of Sarah for learning independence. Proud of myself for making the hard choices that allowed her to learn it. The year that had started with a locked door and a broken heart was ending with an open conversation and cautious hope. Not the happy ending I'd once imagined, where my sacrifices were rewarded with gratitude and my generosity was appreciated. Something better. Something real. It's been 6 months since that coffee shop conversation, and our relationship continues to evolve. Sarah calls regularly now, but not because she needs money. She calls to tell me about books she's reading, problems she's solved on her own, small victories in her daily life. Last month, she insisted on paying for lunch when we met for her birthday. It was just a sandwich shop in Astoria, nothing fancy, but watching her pull out her own wallet and pay for both of us was worth more than any expensive gift I could have given her. "This feels good," she said, signing the receipt. "Taking care of you for once. Taking care of me for once." I realized that in all my years of giving, I'd never taught her the joy of generosity, only the expectation of receiving it. Now she was learning both sides of love, how to accept it and how to give it. My life has become quieter but richer. I still work at the hospital, but I've reduced my hours now that I'm not funding anyone else's lifestyle. I travel more, small trips, nothing extravagant, but adventures chosen because I want to take them rather than because someone else needs me to stay home and solve problems. I've made friends, real friends who enjoy my company without needing my money. I've discovered hobbies I never had time for when every free moment was spent managing other people's crises. I've learned to live for myself without guilt. The apartment still has thin walls and a cranky radiator, but it feels like home now instead of a hiding place. I've hung artwork on the walls, prints from my trips, photos of friends rather than family obligations, visual reminders that my life has value beyond its utility to others. Sometimes I think about the woman I was 2 years ago, constantly anxious about money, constantly available for other people's emergencies, constantly afraid that saying no would mean being abandoned. She feels like someone from another lifetime, though I understand how she got so lost. She confused love with sacrifice so completely that she forgot they weren't the same thing. She thought being needed meant being loved, but being needed can be a form of being used if the need is never accompanied by gratitude or reciprocity or respect. I don't regret loving Sarah completely during her childhood. I don't regret the sacrifices I made when she was small and dependent and truly needed protection. But I do regret the years I spent teaching her that my love could be measured by my willingness to empty my bank account. Children need to learn that love has boundaries, that help should move them toward independence rather than deeper dependence, that gratitude is not optional when someone makes sacrifices on your behalf. I failed to teach those lessons when she was young, so life had to teach them to both of us when we were older. The locked door on that Christmas morning 2 years ago wasn't the end of our relationship. It was the beginning of an honest one. It was the moment when I finally chose my own survival over someone else's convenience, my own peace over someone else's crisis. But the lessons I learned extend far beyond my relationship with Sarah. They've changed how I approach every aspect of my life, every relationship, every decision about how to spend my time and energy and resources. I've learned about the difference between helping and enabling. Help moves someone toward independence, enabling keeps them dependent. Help is given with boundaries, enabling has no limits. Help builds self-respect in both the giver and receiver, enabling erodes it in both. I've learned about the difference between guilt and love. Love wants what's best for someone even if it's difficult, guilt gives what's easiest to avoid confrontation. Love maintains boundaries, guilt obliterates them. Love is sustainable, guilt is exhausting. I've learned about the difference between support and rescue. Support helps someone learn to solve their own problems, rescue solves problems for them. Support builds strength, rescue creates weakness. Support respects the other person's capability, rescue assumes their inability. Most importantly, I've learned that you can't love someone into making good choices. You can't sacrifice yourself into making someone else responsible. You can't fix someone's life by breaking your own. These weren't lessons I wanted to learn. They came with tremendous pain, multiple broken relationships, and years of questioning whether I was a terrible person for finally saying no to needs that seemed urgent and real. But they were necessary lessons, ones that ultimately made me a better mother, a better friend, and a better version of myself. The recovery process from years of enabling isn't quick or easy. There are setbacks, moments of doubt, times when old patterns try to reassert themselves. There are people who will test your new boundaries, who will try to make you feel guilty for having them, who will attempt to pull you back into the familiar dysfunction of one-sided giving. I've had to learn to sit with other people's disappointment without rushing to fix it. I've had to accept that some relationships won't survive the introduction of boundaries, and that this is actually a good thing. It means those relationships were based on what you could provide rather than who you are. I've had to develop a new vocabulary of responses to requests that would have once emptied my bank account. That sounds really difficult. I can see why you're stressed about that. I hope you find a solution. These acknowledge the problem without making it my responsibility to solve. I've had to learn the difference between empathy and enmeshment. I can feel sorry for someone's difficulties without feeling obligated to fix them. I can understand their stress without taking it on as my own. I can love them without losing myself. The physical effects of this emotional shift were dramatic and unexpected. Within months of setting boundaries with Sarah and Marcus, my chronic back pain began to improve. My blood pressure dropped. My sleep quality increased. My energy levels rose significantly. I hadn't realized how much the constant stress of managing other people's crises was affecting my health. The weight of always being on call for someone else's emergency had been literally weighing me down, creating physical tension that I'd assumed was just part of aging. Now, at 74, I feel more energetic than I did at 70. I wake up curious about my own day instead of anxious about what crisis someone else might bring me. I make plans based on what I want to do instead of what I need to be available for. The financial recovery has been equally dramatic. My savings account grows each month instead of being drained by other people's emergencies. My retirement plan is back on track. I've even been able to make small improvements to my apartment, a new kitchen table, better lighting, a comfortable reading chair. These might seem like small things, but they represent something revolutionary for me, the idea that I deserve comfort and beauty and resources directed toward my own life. For years, any money that wasn't absolutely necessary for basic survival felt selfish to spend on myself when someone else needed it more. Now I understand that my needs matter too. My comfort matters. My future security matters. Taking care of myself isn't selfish, it's necessary for having anything to give to others from a place of choice rather than depletion. The social aspects of recovery have been more complex. Some people in my life found it difficult to accept my new boundaries. Friends who had grown used to my unlimited availability had to adjust to a Margaret who sometimes said no to last-minute requests, who didn't always put other people's needs before her own. But I also discovered that many people actually respected me more when I started respecting myself. The book club members, my walking group, my new friends, they seemed to appreciate that I showed up out of genuine desire rather than obligation or guilt. Sarah's journey toward independence has had its own ups and downs. There were months when she barely spoke to me, clearly hoping that silence would pressure me back into my old patterns of giving. There were moments when she tried to manipulate me with tales of crises that needed immediate financial intervention. But gradually, she began to develop problem-solving skills she'd never needed before. She learned to negotiate with landlords, to find roommates, to budget her income, to prioritize expenses. She discovered she was more capable than either of us had realized. Her job performance improved when she was no longer relying on my financial backup to cover the consequences of poor decisions. Her relationships became healthier when she had to contribute rather than just receive. Her self-respect grew as she proved to herself that she could manage her own life. The transformation wasn't instant or linear. There were setbacks, moments of backsliding, times when old patterns tried to reassert themselves on both sides. But the overall trajectory has been toward greater health, greater honesty, and greater mutual respect. Our conversations now have depth and reciprocity that was missing for years. She asks about my life, shares genuine details about hers, offers advice and support instead of just requesting it. She's become someone I enjoy spending time with rather than someone I felt obligated to rescue. Last month, when I had a minor medical procedure, Sarah took time off work to drive me to the appointment and stay with me afterward. She'd never done anything like that before. Caring for me hadn't occurred to her when our relationship was focused on her needs and my resources. "How are you feeling, Mom?" she asked, bringing me tea and adjusting my pillows. "Do you need anything?" The experience of being cared for by my daughter was overwhelming in the best possible way. For so many years, the flow of care had been entirely one-directional. Having it reciprocated felt like a miracle. But perhaps the most significant change has been internal, the transformation of my own sense of self-worth. For decades, I had measured my value by my usefulness to others, particularly to Sarah. When people needed me, I felt important. When they were satisfied with what I'd given, I felt loved. This was an exhausting way to live, because it meant my emotional well-being was constantly dependent on other people's needs and reactions. I had no stable sense of my own worth that existed independent of my ability to solve problems and provide resources. Learning to value myself for who I am rather than what I can give has been the most difficult and most rewarding part of this journey. It's required developing interests and relationships that don't involve caretaking. It's meant discovering what brings me joy when that joy doesn't depend on someone else's gratitude. I've found satisfaction in my volunteer work not because it makes me feel needed, but because it aligns with my values of service and community. I enjoy my book club not because I'm solving anyone's problems, but because I love discussions about literature and ideas. I appreciate my friendship with Mrs. Chen not because she requires anything from me, but because we genuinely enjoy each other's company. These relationships and activities have given me a foundation of self-worth that doesn't fluctuate based on other people's crises or needs. I know who I am now independent of my role as rescuer, and that knowledge has brought a peace I'd never experienced before. The process of writing and sharing this story has been part of my healing journey. For too long, I carried shame about the years of enabling, the financial losses, the damaged relationship with my daughter. I felt like my kindness had been a weakness, my generosity a mistake. But telling this story has helped me see it differently. I wasn't weak or stupid or gullible. I was a mother who loved her child and wanted to protect her from hardship, even when that protection became harmful. I was a woman raised to believe that love meant sacrifice, even when the sacrifice became unsustainable. My mistakes were understandable, even if they were costly. More importantly, they were correctable. It's never too late to change patterns that aren't serving you or the people you love. It's never too late to learn healthier ways of loving. Recovery from enabling requires developing new skills and insights that most of us were never taught. We learn about romantic relationships and friendships, but we rarely learn about healthy boundaries with family. We're taught about the importance of giving, but not about the danger of giving too much. We hear about the value of selflessness, but not about the necessity of self-preservation. The cultural messages around motherhood are particularly challenging in this regard. Good mothers are supposed to sacrifice everything for their children. Good mothers put their children's needs before their own. Good mothers never stop giving, never stop being available, never stop solving problems. These messages don't include guidelines about when children become adults who need to solve their own problems. They don't address what happens when unlimited giving creates unlimited expecting. They don't acknowledge that sacrificing yourself completely doesn't actually help anyone in the long run. Learning to be a different kind of mother, one who loves deeply but gives wisely, who supports without enabling, who maintains boundaries while maintaining connection, required unlearning decades of conditioning about what it means to be good and loving and maternal. It's been a lonely process at times. There aren't many models for this kind of transformation, especially for older women who are expected to be settled in their ways. There isn't much cultural support for mothers who step back from endless giving, even when that giving has become harmful. But the rewards have been immense. I have a relationship with my daughter that's based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. I have a life that belongs to me rather than being constantly given away to others. I have resources and energy for my own interests and needs. Most importantly, I have peace. The kind of deep, sustainable peace that comes from living in alignment with your values rather than being driven by guilt and obligation. The peace of knowing that you're loved for who you are rather than what you can provide. If you're reading this and recognizing your own patterns, please know that change is possible at any age, in any circumstance. You don't have to empty yourself to prove your love. You don't have to solve everyone's problems to be worthy of affection. You don't have to sacrifice your own well-being to be a good person. The people who truly love you want you to be whole and healthy and happy. They don't want you to exhaust yourself trying to fix their lives. They appreciate your help without exploiting your kindness. They respect your boundaries instead of testing them constantly. If someone in your life only contacts you when they need something, if they become angry when you can't help, if they make you feel guilty for having limits, then the problem isn't with your boundaries, it's with their expectations. Love should feel nourishing, not depleting. Relationships should be reciprocal, not transactional. Family connections should bring joy, not constant anxiety about the next crisis. You have the right to say no to requests that would harm your financial security, your emotional well-being, or your peace of mind. You have the right to ask for gratitude and respect in return for your generosity. You have the right to expect people to solve their own problems instead of constantly bailing them out of the consequences of their choices. Setting these boundaries doesn't make you selfish or cruel or unloving. It makes you human. It makes you sustainable. It makes you someone who can give from choice rather than compulsion, from abundance rather than depletion. The locked door that started this story was devastating at the time, but it ultimately led to my liberation. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us redirect us toward the best lives we never imagined possible. My name is Margaret, and at 74 years old, I'm finally learning to love myself as much as I love others. I'm finally discovering who I am when I'm not constantly giving myself away. I'm finally building a life that belongs to me. If any part of this resonates with you, please know that you're not alone. Please know that change is possible. Please know that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you whole. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for allowing me to share these painful but necessary truths. And thank you for being on your own journey toward healthy relationships and self-respect. Remember, you deserve love that doesn't cost you everything you have. You deserve relationships that nourish rather than drain you. You deserve to live your own life, not just fund everyone else's. It's never too late to start, and you're never too old to choose yourself.